Introduction to the series. I'm going to start with this.
Touchy. Ooh, a Bugatti. What color is it? Another girlfriend? Yummy. Hurrah! Touchy. Woo! Bitches attack. Woo! House arrest. Free touchy.
The NPC meta has taken over TikTok. The latest TikTok trend is behaving like an NPC. So how does it work? Well, you can donate money on TikTok through certain tokens. There are ice creams, cowboys, roses and whatnot. In the videos or streams, you make typical NPC movements until someone redeems these tokens.
Hey, thanks for the rose. 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 Hey, thanks for the rose.
Once that happens, the streamer makes a repetitive motion and sentence.
Take your joke, take your I don't know, take your tape, take your I am. Ooh, yes.
Simple enough, and it's working. TikToker Nerdy Winter made $700 in her first 3-hour NPC stream. She adds that already established NPC streamers are making $2,000 to $4,000 per stream.
Roses. Please. I like chicken.
Hello, I'm AI.
GG. Thank you for the share.
Look at all the butterflies. Gang. Is that a gummy bear? Squishy. I love ice cream. Glizzy. Roses smell so good.
Yum! A hot dog! Yum! Gag! A lollipop! I love to suck on lollipops.
Marshmallow. Crunchy corn, yum! Kitty paws, pumpkin, yum! Not spicy. Ice cream, yum! Kitty paws,
Yeah, right. So I think there's a lot to be said about these NPC simulations, right? You can talk about TikTok, of course, gamer culture, cross-platform interactions, because some of these people, like Cherry Crush here, is also an OnlyFans sex worker, and this is a kind of gateway into the OnlyFans site. Similarly with Pinky Doll, who's the most successful one of these NPC characters. There's the primacy of gestures, which is a fundamental thing in TikTok, more than language. The kind of sublingual, like language just becomes a bunch of vocalizations. So I'm not going to do the noises, don't worry. When I finally, like, with all the strike action, I might have to resort to something like this, but don't know how well I'll do. Especially with my OnlyFans, I know. So that language kind of becomes just these kind of small vocalizations, these kind of burps of noise. And so language kind of becomes a form of gesture. And I think if you're doing the MFA year one, I think this is the kind of thing that Michael Newman might be talking about in his workshop. We can also talk about the performativity of gig work, which has been an issue in recent years, since about 2000s, about precarity of work. In a way, what people are doing here is not that different in terms of like the dependence upon getting an order in, basically, like the Rose or whatever, than your Deliveroo rider or your Uber Eats rider. How service sector becomes personhood becomes part of the service sector, which is clearly what's going on here. Pornification, as I said, many of these people are using these NPC streams on TikTok as gateways to their OnlyFans sites and other sex work sites. Cutification of global culture, a kind of reliance on kawaii or hentai aesthetics to kind of, just be successful with this kind of thing. Okay? But I think the main thing here that kind of is going to introduce the talk series is that what people are doing in the NPC makes really explicit performed behavioral responses to user input. Right? So when somebody buys a rose, there's a transaction, and then the NPC character makes this kind of noise. No. Yeah. Okay, makes this kind of noise.
Damn marshmallow.
Okay, but the noises are only.
Crunchy corn, yum. Kitty paws.
All right. The noises are in response to inputs, which are forms of data. Okay. So behavior in these NPC videos, behavior is data, and data input, which is also user engagement, is behavior is transaction. Okay. So you have this kind of loop set up between the stimulus, which is both the command for the NPC character, but also the stimulus of the user. Go upwards, that becomes data for the platform. There's a transaction point, which is the commercial transaction, because you've got to pay for the input. And then that becomes affect, both performed affect by the NPC character, but also the affect of the person who's the things we felt as we were watching this. Okay? But these things are kind of part of one loop. And this is the loop, I think, of what human behaviors are on online platforms, okay, from the side of the platform. So the platform is that top end of the loop, and the subject, us watching it, as well as in a way the subject who's performing is this kind of bottom end over here. But as far as the platform is concerned, we as users are nothing more than stimulus and affect producing data and transactions. Okay? That's all we are for any platform that you use. So it doesn't matter how enraged you are when you're using your Twitter or Instagram, and people are not enraged on Instagram, how deliberate and careful you are in making the image for your Instagram feed, how angry or annoyed or kind of like needing to engage in a public conversation and make other people hear your voice on your Twitter feed or whatever other platform you're on. How much effort, how much meaning, how much of yourself you put into the post, how heated, engaged, or rehearsed you are in your social media account, every input on the platform is a behavioral response signal. Okay? And this is all we are as far as the app is concerned. As far as the app and the platforms are concerned, we're not any different to the NPC characters. We're all doing NPC stimulations. Okay? Which is why what's called user engagement is an effort to kind of increase our behavioral responses, which are also usually reflex responses, because we know that what we're producing when we respond is data, and data is commodity as far as the platform is concerned. Okay? So even if you're not paying to engage, your engagement becomes commercialized at some other point. Right? But the point I'm basically trying to make is that NPC looks very fucking weird when you see it like this, but we've been doing it for a long time. Okay? When you strip out the human element, the thing that makes us deep, meaningful subjects, we're essentially performing like this all the time. Okay? On the platforms, as far as the platform is concerned. What drops out in this kind of doesn't drop out necessarily for the user, but what drops out, seen from the platform side, is internal life, okay? Which is a kind of modern notion of subjectivity, that we have internal lives, that are emotionally rich, that we have kind of a depth to us, which is our true subjectivity. Depth psychology drops out. There's no ego or id or any of those kinds of psychological terms. There's just behavioral reflex responses to a stimulus. And personal identity also drops out. These are non-playing characters, and if it follows, this is kind of very quick, okay, this argument might fall apart very quickly, but if it's the case that we're all essentially doing this NPC stimulus response thing, the sense of personal identity doesn't really matter. We're just characters generating data to a stimulus for a transaction, and affect is really important in that. The more affected you are as a user, the more engaged you are, the more data you produce. So even in the video game NPCs, the characters you'll see that what am I trying to say? Okay, if you play video games, if you see non-playing characters, they're non-playing characters because they temporarily or permanently drop out of the narrative, usually organized around the gamer, who's the human subject. The characters are kind of peripheral elements in an environment who populate it but don't really do anything until they're activated. Okay. So these NPCs are essentially surplus populations, and they populate a world but without any narrative contribution. There's no story of the self, there's no rehearsal or shaping what people do, okay, as NPCs. The shrinking of action, that there's no coherent story when we watch Cherry Crush here, right, or Pink Doll or any of the rest of them. There's no coherent narrative, there's no coherent story, no narrative beginning or end, or nearly zero. You could probably find some sort of narrative if you wanted to, but you'd be hard pressed to do it. The subjects are only their behaviors, only their reflexes, and that, again, is a transaction. A transaction is a signal is data, data is the subject. We are data subjects. That's what we are on platforms, and we're on platforms all the time. Okay? The rocking motion, even, let me play this if I can. Yeah, this kind of rocking motion, right, is a kind of stasis. It's kind of like minimal, like going forward in time, which is part of what narratives are about, but not really, because he kind of rocks back to where they were before. Okay? There's no narrative development, if you want. So it's a stasis in time and action, a going nowhere, no transition from a past to future, only signal responses, which is making money. And that's even disputable, because the numbers we hear are, of course, the numbers that are trying to say this works amazingly well. There's a whole bunch of people who do not very well on this as well. Right? So experience, then, what used to be called human experience, that's the point I've just been making. Experience becomes momentary, stimulus response, affect, aesthetic reflex, monetized. Okay? Very different to a traditional notion of what artists are up to, which is like depth, meaning, sophistication, intellectuality, so on and so forth, which in some ways is like a fairly traditional notion of what a depth subject might be. And so the question then becomes, well, what role does art take in relation to what's being produced here? And this is not just about NPCs, as I've been trying to say, this is also about us being platform subjects. So the absence of cogent narrative as a form of human action is kind of happening in this kind of micro scale, but I think it's also happening in a very different context of climate breakdown. Here's a slide from Stockholm Resilience Center. This is the QR code for the report, which is cited up there. This came out over summer. Earth is beyond the six of 9 planetary boundaries. So let me see if this works. Yeah. So this is from 2009. This is what's called a pizza chart. That thing there is the Earth. The green zone means that these different elements, ocean acidification, stratospheric ozone depletion, land system change, and so on. If you're in the green zone, it's all good, right? The Earth is sustainable, it's resilient. And as soon as you start leaving it, it's not so good, right? So biosphere integrity in 2009 was pretty bad, but actually something like ocean acidification, yeah, not too bad. It wasn't great, but it wasn't too bad. And then as you see, 2023, yeah, all right. This is us flying to our biennials and art fairs. Okay. There's very little left over here, which is stratospheric ozone depletion and atmospheric aerosol loading. But the rest of it is fucked. And that's where we are. And it's, of course, just going to get worse until about 2030, 2035. Although maybe Chiara will tell us differently. All right. So what they're trying to do with this is show that over the last, how long is that, 14 years? Maybe in 2009, we didn't have to work that hard as a species or as something called humanity to kind of pull things back to something in the sustainable zone. But now there's going to have to be a lot of work done. Okay? But the thing I'm not going to speak too much about this because this is going to be the subject of Chiara's talk in one way. The thing I want to really get to in this is the use of this pizza chart format, which is what these charts are called. Pizza charts, you can see why. Right? That they show, it's important to have a pizza chart to kind of describe these boundary breakdowns, as the Stockholm people call it, because these show different stresses on historically habitable environments in the geographical period of the Holocene, which is now coming to an end. And the thing that this shows is that there are several independent but interlinked factors. For example, this thing here, novel entities, that's stuff that humans have put into the planet, which aren't natural things. Okay? So there was no data at that point in 2009, but we'll see that things like microplastics, it's not great, according to this chart. Right? The thing to do, stuff with microplastics, recycling stuff, is not the same issue as biochemical flows or biogeochemical flows, and it's not the same thing as land system change or stratospheric ozone depletion. There's probably some link, but you can think of these problems independently. The climate breakdown issue or the Anthropocene issue requires us to think about all of these things, if not even more things, all at the same time, which is why it seems such a large and unforgiving problem. In any case, it's a multiple problem, it's a disparate problem, it's multiply disparate, which means all the different elements don't necessarily connect up. There's no kind of one solution to this complex and difficult situation, right? There's no embodied experience which is adequate to this. Right? This is, of course, the struggle about Anthropocene politics. Like, it's much larger than any body's perspective on it, and no one person is responsible. It's a distributed problem. But also, I think what gets shown with these charts is that, look, bodies have a front and a back. Okay? There's a direction, an orientation. What the pizza thing shows in the 360 all-round depiction is that the problem has many faces and many dimensions simultaneously. This problem just doesn't correspond to human embodiment or even animal embodiment. Okay? It's another type of problem. If you want to address this a bit more, you can have a look at Amitav Ghosh, The Great Derangement, Dipesh Chakrabarty, Climate of History in a Planetary Age, and I think Chiara is going to be speaking more about this today. Something like this, anyway, like a version of this. So, planetary resilience breakdown. That's another one. Okay, planetary resilience breakdown is not just about material conditions exceeding historical limits of humans and other Holocene species, which is something we'll come back to in the second series of these talks. It's also a breakdown of the possibility of background conditions, which we know, material conditions, but also the breakdown of a cogent narrative of what happens next. Right? A narrative takes you from one place to another, but it's not clear what a narrative could be, like an encompassing narrative, which would start and end somewhere, given that the problem is disparate, multiple, and different things are going on. And as I said, this, I think, is something that Chiara's been working on for a little while, and we'll come back to it maybe in the discussion. I want to move, so these are two examples of where narrative is failing, basically, doesn't work, or something else is going apart from narrative structures. So I think what happens with planetary conditions, what's called the Anthropocene, is at the level of narrative inadequacy. It's the same issue as the NPCs. It's not as much fun, but it's a similar kind of incapacitation of organizing ourselves through narrative. Okay, the narrative breakdown around climate breakdown is a narrative breakdown around a long future rather than the micro-present. So I'm going to conclude with a kind of depiction like the meta-problem. So this is using Jean-Francois Lyotard's epochal short essay, Postmodern Condition, from 1979, kind of around the birth of neoliberalism in the West. And Lyotard has said postmodernism is the move from grand narratives, the great narratives of history, the narrative of progress, the narrative of emancipation, the narrative of knowledge, giving freedom and sort of a good society, that people don't believe in this stuff anymore. And this is around the time of the collapse of faith in communism. What we have now is sort of small narratives, okay? But what's involved in these, in this shift from modernism to postmodernism is not just the move from grand narratives to small narratives, it's that the subject moves from a subject involved of an intergenerational meaning, like the grand narrative happens over centuries. It's intergenerational because the revolutionaries who fought in 1789 set a standard that people will follow through, and it's a lesson for all times. Small narratives are really narratives about what's happening to me and my people. Okay? So the narratives, the duration of narrative is really days and years rather than centuries. The form is embodied experience rather than intergenerational. This is the space of contemporary art. Right? And of course, the representational mode is biography rather than the epic. Okay? The scale goes from large to medium. Medium because it's like this size. It's our size, like 1 or 2 meters. Over days and years, rather than very large, the history of a people over centuries. So that's what Lyotard was talking about in 79. But I think what we can introduce is these other strands. Like I think the Anthropocene thing is looking at the extra large scale, and the NPC thing is looking at the extra small scale. Right? Let's go with NPC first. The transmission mode goes from narrative to information. The subject is no longer one of embodied experience, but user service consumer data. That's the platform subject. The representational mode is no longer biography, but clickbait. And using Diane Bauer, artist and writer, we're no longer in a time of centuries, days, or years, but in what Diane called a xenotemporality. Okay? It's a strange alien temporality, alien to human internal time consciousness. And with the very large scale of climate breakdown, which is of course a multi-millennial issue, let me go with the subject. The subjects that we look at are species rather than individuals. Okay? It's not even like a people across several generations. It's multi-millennial. So we're looking at species extinction, for example. Humans have to do something about it, which is also a kind of abdication of individual responsibilities. The representational mode is no longer epic or biography, but risk and speculation. Again, I think the time scale is one of xenotemporality. But the transmission mode is no longer even narrative, it's just abstraction and calculation. So like the Stockholm graphs are just built up through a whole set of computer modeling, looking at things through data inputs and then projecting forward. And there's various kind of complications around that, which we might hear about in the coming days. This talk and the next talk. This middle bit here is historically human culture, which means that, put it this way, with the pressure from the extra large and the extra small, what we realize is this stuff about going from modernism to postmodernism is actually just a discussion of historical human culture. Indigenous cultures, tradition cultures, and so on, are of course this intergenerational type of, they're not modernist, but there are grand narratives, intergenerational, epochal types of narratives of identity. Okay. But these two, extra small and extra large columns, tell us that this issue from modernism to postmodernism, it's just about historical human culture, and other things are happening. All right. I think this is a question. Like, what happens now we're intimate with both of these things? It seems to me open. What we can say is that the biography fails as an adequate kind of representational mode, and also the epic fails. Okay? The epic is the very large story of it kind of connects people across generations or across decades. So this series is really starts to work, opens up these questions. This is all very speculative and a bit rangy. Starts to work on what happens when the story we tell ourselves about what it is to be a self, individually or collectively, doesn't work in practice, because narratives can't really do the work they used to do, which is to bind both communities and also people. So this the kind of idea that each of us is the story we tell ourselves, either individually or collectively. That's what our identities are. That's going to be at least undermined or kind of put into doubt when we enter into this kind of space. Okay? But this story that we are our narratives is a transgenerational and deeply embedded story. And it's also about it might also be about the fundamentals of human consciousness. Humans remember better through narratives than through facts. which is why we're deficient when it comes to operating in information societies. And maybe that's okay. So this problem about what happens to subjectivity is itself an epic problem. So the title of this series is not Biography Fail or Biograph Fail, right? It's rather Epic Fail. Right? So the usual sense of epic fail is that here is somebody who has failed in an epic way. It is a momentous and calamitous failure, a bit like Manchester City yesterday, maybe. But that's not the sense in which it's meant for this talk. What it's meant is that the very notion of the epic, this transgenerational interconnection of meaning, the sense of a long history, the sense that we're connected in a deep way to our past and our future, that fails, okay, in the conditions that I was describing.